Hello, welcome from my new series, Daoism and Martial Arts. So the purpose of this series is to read a chapter of the Tao with every video, and then we're going to study it and based on the understanding of martial arts. So we'll read the passage and then interpret it for martial arts practice or martial arts application or martial arts teaching, whatever relating to martial arts itself. So this is going to be a less action-packed series, I guess. So to you know, give a bone to everybody, I'm probably going to be interlacing videos in this series with other series which are a little bit more actiony, so that everybody can have a little bit of bone. So, without further ado, we're going to be reading first from the first chapter of the Tao Te Ching. So, if you want to read along, this is by Stephen Mitchell. This is the translation that I'm going to be using, and it is a really good translation for bringing the esoteric language into a little bit more practical language, at least I've found myself. And my student, who is a practicing Taoist and a Taoist ordained priest, has recommended it to me, so that's what we're going to be using for this series. All right, so first chapter. And it should be up on the screen for you to read along, or if you want to read along with your own book, you can do so. So, the Tao that can be told is not the eternal Tao. The name that can be named is not the eternal name. The unnameable is the eternally real. The naming is the origin of all particular things. Free from desire, you realize the mystery. Caught in desire, you see only the manifestations. Yet mystery and manifestations arise from the same source. This source is called darkness. Darkness within darkness, the gateway to all understanding. So, with the first thing we're going to talk about is the Tao that can be told is not the true Tao, and the name that can be named is not the eternal name. So with this, the context we're going to be using is talking about martial arts and experiencing martial arts. So as someone who has, been putting out videos like this and videos like other things, teaching applications and such, right? It's not meant to be taken as a replacement for actual practical experience, right? And nor is any of the books that I've written or anybody else has written, right? And we, even like in class, many people will, practice the techniques, practice their forms, but they won't practice the applications of the forms, so they won't get the personal hands-on experience, and many don't engage in sparring, so they don't get the experience with engaging with these applications in a more chaotic environment where a partner is not necessarily agreeable. So there's no substitute for sparring practice. There's no substitute for applications practice if you want to be good at martial arts as far as fighting goes. So the way that can be the Tao that can be told is not the true Tao, right? I can verbalize something to you, I can show it to you, you can practice it, but if you don't put it into the practice in the application, it's going to be useless. It doesn't mean that on its own it's completely useless, right? Because I can verbalize something to you, and then you can go, oh, that makes sense, and let me apply that to what I'm doing now. But it has to be applied. It can't be by itself. So it's not that books, videos, online courses, and stuff are useless. It's just that on their own in a vacuum is useless. It has to be supplemented with practical experience. So that means practicing with a partner, right? So that's the first part that we're going to be going over. Now, continuing along that line of thought, teachers are guides. They are not what's going to get you to the advanced level martial arts on their own. So you have to, at some point, right, put it into your own words, so to speak. In the same way that we can put the words of the Tao into our own words for applying them to other things like we're doing here, right? So at first, when beginning, it's important to understand by copying the teacher as closely as possible, because then you can understand what they're trying to teach you, and then you can apply it to your practice. And then in an intermediate level, you continue to copy the teacher in order to get into the more detailed analysis of what they're trying to teach you. But when you become a certain level of advanced, there needs to be a part in which you stop copying the teacher. Because at this point, copying the teacher anymore is just going to make you a carbon copy of them, and you can never truly be a carbon copy of anyone else, because you'll never move like you, will never move like me, I will never move like my teacher, because we have different bodies and we have different experiences, and that leads us to applying our arts a little bit differently. And this is a good thing, right? It's the same thing that happens with painting and any kind of art, right? First, you start to copy all the great artists of the past to learn their style and learn how they became big names in the first place. But eventually, after you've learned your foundations and you've learned the different styles and you've learned how to express from different styles, you need to be able to express your own style. Now, this is detrimental if you do it too early because you don't have the foundations yet. But after a certain amount of points, right, you start to naturally and almost unintentionally develop your own style. Not necessarily that you're creating a whole new system, but that the system that you're practicing is now filtered through the thought that is you, right? So for me, I'm a lot skinnier than my teacher, so I can't apply the same way that like the art that he practices. I have to apply towards my own body mechanics. I'm a lot more flexible and wiry, so I can apply more flexible and wiry like techniques and principles. But I don't have as much muscle and weight to throw around in order to really throw my opponent around. I can use the best with what I've got, but not to the same degree that someone who's like bigger than me might be able to. So I can't just copy my teacher and, to the same degree that he practices. I need to do for my own self, and then you will need to do for your own self as well. So for a while, copy the teacher. Then after a while, it's no longer meant to be copied. They're a guide towards practical experience and principles, but they are not the principles themselves. Next, the unnameable is the eternally real. The naming is the origin of all particular things. So with this, right, there's the concepts of things in life. And then we start to name them. We start to divide them. We start to just compare and contrast. That's where we get all these particular things. But everything before the unnameable is what's referred to as the Tao. So with this, we're going to compare it as the comparison between principles and techniques. The real is the principles. The real is the concepts. The nameable is the techniques. From principles and concepts, we get techniques. We can get infinite number of techniques. But it's the principles and the concepts that are the driving force behind every one of those techniques. So if I learn a technique, I've learned one technique. But if I've learned the principle behind that technique, I can create infinite number of techniques based around that principle. Like the idea of striking high in order to distract them while you strike low, which is your intended target, right? So if the technique is to slap up high and then strike down low, well, I can do the same thing by striking high and kicking down low, right? It's the same thing, but it's a different technique within the same principle archetype. So from the principles, we get all the techniques that we need. Doesn't mean that techniques are useless by themselves, but if only practiced for the sake of the technique and not understanding the full principle behind them, then it becomes just a technique that works for reasons that we don't really comprehend or understand. But if we can comprehend and understand the principles behind them, then we can not only do a good technique that works that one time, but we can do many techniques that work because they work along that same principle and they still trick the opponent every time. Or not every time, but you know what I mean. So always be guiding with the principles for all your techniques. Next, free from desire, you realize the mystery. Caught in desire, you see only its manifestations. So this works in so many things, right? Even outside of martial arts, but within the martial arts context. We can always get caught up in learning the next technique and learning the next thing because it's always going to be something more to learn. It's going to be some new, cool, shiny thing that we want to learn. But if we get caught up in this, it becomes a lot more clutter and it doesn't really help us get better at martial arts, right? It's the same kind of things I was talking about. You can learn infinite number of techniques, but if you don't know the principles behind those techniques, then those techniques are very hollow. So we need to reduce our desire to learn new shapes, new techniques, right? We can learn them as they're taught to us, but we need to keep in mind to keep our attention on the right things. So in this, we take less of an attachment to learning the next move in the form, to learning the next technique. And we instead keep our minds on the foundations. We keep our minds on the principles that we're being taught, the things that our teachers are emphasizing, the things that are a lot more boring, a lot less shiny, but they're going to ultimately firm our foundations, firm our understanding of the principles, and then enhance our techniques from there. So the more that we get caught in the desire of techniques, the more we can become a forms machine, the more we can just become a technical fighter as far as like just learning infinite number of techniques. But if you learn so many techniques, you're not going to be able to use them because you're just going to learn the technique and then learn the next technique and then learn the next technique, and you'll never have a chance to use them all. And then you never get the chance to experience what it's like to use them. And then when you actually get into a situation, you're going to freeze up because you have all these techniques, but you don't have the experience for which to use them. So we need to keep our mind on the right things and not get caught in the desires of all the new shiny things. Enjoy the shiny things when they come, but don't be chasing them. Lastly, darkness within darkness, the gateway to all understanding. So understanding this, let's first talk about the darkness. The darkness is in the idea of not knowing, of not understanding. The idea that if we're sitting alone in the darkness, we don't know what else is in there, we don't know what else is out there, and that's where a lot of us have this kind of fear, because we are fearful of like what we don't know, and that's why like things like racism exists and bigotry, because we don't know enough, and therefore we try to seclude ourselves within something that's a little bit more familiar so that we can feel a little bit more comfortable. Getting used to the darkness is important, not only for martial arts, but for everyday life, right? So to sum up this is, again, darkness is the not knowing, and the not knowing is the gateway to understanding. So if you're familiar with the Greeks and Greek philosophers like Socrates, he stated that the beginning of wisdom is an understanding that we know nothing. So the idea here is that if we know nothing, if we understand that we know nothing, then we are ready to learn. If we already think we know everything, then we're not going to be learning anything because we already think we know. If you're looking for your keys, like, and you think you found them, you're going to stop looking for them, right? So I always liken it to this. If you're alone, in a dark apartment, you're looking for your keys, you find a jingling set of keys. It's like, okay, now I'm going to go start my car. It's also dark in there. So you go to start, wrong key, wrong key, wrong key. You go through all the keys and you're just like, oh, maybe I missed one. Let me go through them again. You keep going, keep going, keep going. For some reason, the car's not starting. Let me just keep going. But the idea of that I have the keys is I think I know something. But what I didn't realize is I took my wife's keys. So that's not really going to start my car, is it? So rather, you need to be open to the idea that maybe I have the wrong set of keys. So it's not necessarily that you don't know anything, right? But it's an understanding that you can always be learning more and you might be wrong about something. So always be open to this idea that you have the wrong set of keys. So whether anything, right, and even martial arts included, many people have many opinions, especially in the martial arts community. Yeah. So anyone who's in the comments section will know that. So we have to get to the point where we can say, okay, this that I'm experiencing from this person's perspective is different from my perspective, but maybe it's because he knows something that I don't. And it might not necessarily be that I'm wrong about what I know. It might necessarily be that we're both right within our own context. Like the idea that some arts like to kick high, because kicking high, good old knockouts, that's a good way to KO. But some arts are just like, no, we never kick above the belt because that's dangerous. And they're both right? High kicks are high risk, high reward. So ultimately, you can kick high, it's not wrong. And you can also just say, I'm never going to kick high. That's not wrong either, right? You can both have the opposite opinions and still both be right. So it's always coming down to the understanding that, hey, I don't know everything. So maybe I can give this other guy a try. Maybe I can say he has some knowledge and experience that I don't have. That's why he does things the way he does, right? So in this way, we can, generate a little bit more community, a little bit more friendliness, so that we can share our own experiences together rather than butting heads against each other because I know this thing and you're wrong because your view doesn't respond with my view very well. So instead of that, we need to take the not knowing. We need to be comfortable with the darkness. We need to be comfortable with that because that's the way that we can actually understand. Because I could come up to this person who kicks high and be like, I don't know why you kick high. And he's like, okay, let me show you. And then we scrap a little bit and, he does some high kicks and it works. And like, oh, yeah, now that I experienced that, I can see why you do that. So it basically comes down to, be an adult. Be an adult. See you in the next video.